Get out of the car now. This vehicle is in violation. That's what Denise Hallcroft, president of the Merrillwood Preserve HOA, said to my daughter while gripping the handle of her door like it was hers to open. Her HOA badge hung from a lanyard tight against her lavender windbreaker, the kind of overconfident suburban armor she always wore when she thought she could push someone into submission. Eva blinked in disbelief. She was 7 months pregnant. One hand clutched a manila envelope of prenatal medical records. The other barely reached for the seatbelt release before Denise yanked the door open. This driveway is restricted to vehicles with primary registration to the homeowner, Denise said, voice like gravel and bleach. We've warned you before. She didn't see the black SUV idling across the street. Or maybe she thought it was a contractor van. She definitely didn't see Nate, my husband, watching through polarized glass with one finger already on the dash cam's wireless transfer. You'll want to step away from that vehicle, I said quietly, stepping through the gate with my phone already recording. It's federally logged, and this isn't your jurisdiction. For anyone who's dealt with an HOA, you know this isn't unusual, but Denise didn't just cross a line. She dragged a pregnant woman out of a legally parked car. Before I go further, subscribe now. If you've ever had to defend your family from a bully hiding behind a clipboard, this won't be the last time someone like her overreaches, but it might be the last time she does. My name is Dr. Rostin Lantham. I'm a retired Air Force trauma surgeon. These days I run a nonprofit called the Violet Haven Project, helping high-risk mothers access care and shelter. My daughter, Eva, is one of those cases. But not because she's underserved, because her condition is delicate, because stress isn't just dangerous, it's life-threatening, and because women like Denise don't care about life unless it matches their landscape design. The ceramic sundial on my lawn, the one Denise keeps threatening to fine me over, was installed in memory of my mother, a midwife who died during a delivery in 1972. My father carved its base by hand. That sundial is where I proposed to Nate. It's where Eva used to sit and read before her legs swelled too badly to get down the front step, and Denise wanted it gone for reflective glare. This woman has tried everything. Citations for wind direction, flags, noise violations for fountain birds, even a cease and desist for the non-profit delivery box we mounted discreetly under the mailbox. But today, she touched Eva. Eva had parked for less than 2 minutes. She wasn't blocking the sidewalk. She was dropping off sealed medical envelopes from her OB's office, one of which contained documentation of placenta previa, a condition where even sudden movement can lead to hemorrhage. I said out of the car, Denise had screamed, dragging open the door like a repo agent. I crossed the street fast. Nate opened the SUV door slower, on purpose. The man has spent 20 years keeping presidents alive without being noticed. But this wasn't something you watch play out. Denise froze when she saw him. His badge wasn't out. His voice wasn't raised. He didn't need to say much, because the moment Eva clutched her belly and let out a breathless, "Dad!" the power shifted. Not because of rank, but because of proof. We had the footage, the dash cam from Eva's windshield, the motion sensor from my porch camera, the upload from Nate's secure agency app. It wasn't the first time Denise overstepped, but it would be the last time she did it to my family. I'm not the kind of man who posts online rants or threatens lawsuits over bushes or paint codes. But when someone physically endangers a pregnant woman under my roof and calls it regulation, you better believe I stop being polite. This isn't a story about lawn citations. It's about power, false power, and what happens when someone with real authority uses it, not to intimidate, but to protect. Denise didn't know who we were. Now she does. The ambulance arrived 10 minutes later. Not because Eva needed it. We got lucky. No cramping, no bleeding, no emergency delivery. Just a panicked spike in blood pressure and a shaken daughter gripping my hand harder than she ever had in childhood. But the paramedics filed a report. And so did I. While they checked Eva's vitals under the porch awning, Denise stood at the edge of the driveway with her arms crossed like the real crime was blocking her path. Not once did she ask if Eva was okay. Not once did she blink when I told her this would be reported as assault on a vulnerable adult. All she said was, "You people think rules don't apply when you have a sob story." It wasn't just a line. It was a window, a crack in the porcelain she'd painted over everything in Merrillwood Preserve, Because we weren't the first. 2 houses down, the Mitchells were fined twice for letting their autistic son play chalk games on the sidewalk. Their drawings were labeled graffiti by the board. At the end of the block, Maria Esposito's mailbox was removed without warning. Non-standard post, the citation claimed. Never mind that it had been standing since her husband died in '06. And last summer, an Army vet named Tennyson was told to remove his solar panels or face daily penalties. Denise said they disrupted visual harmony. The man's electric bill dropped 60%, but the board took him to mediation anyway. None of us had connected the dots back then, not out loud. But now Denise had gone too far. While Eva rested inside, Nate stayed posted near the porch, hands folded, watching the flow of neighbors trickle toward the sidewalk, whispering, watching. Not one person stepped forward, until the next morning. At 7:43 a.m. sharp, a letter slid under our door, no envelope, no return name, typed, no punctuation. HOA not authorized for behavioral citation escalation under Section 12F. Last 2 meetings lacked required quorum. Cross-check bylaws. Look at April minutes. I didn't need long. I knew enough about policy structure from running a federally funded nonprofit. If the HOA had passed anything without a quorum and then used those rules to justify escalation, those fines, warnings, and intimidation tactics could be retroactively challenged. But that wasn't the shock. The shock was what I saw on my walk that morning. A fresh flyer taped to the community bulletin board near the park gate. In large block font, enforce the rules equally or step down. And beneath it, safety for all, not just appearance. It wasn't signed, but someone was done staying quiet. Later that afternoon, while Eva napped with her legs propped up and a cold compress on her head, I walked down to the HOA's clubhouse office. Denise wasn't there. Her car was. But the blinds were drawn and the door was locked. In the entryway, just inside the glass, a stack of newsletters sat untouched on a folding table. I stepped closer and read the headline, Spring Reinforcements, Ensuring Order in Merrillwood. The photo showed Denise standing next to a private security vehicle she'd contracted for code enforcement observations. No vote had ever been held. Beneath that, a paragraph detailing the new Standing Vehicle Initiative. The same regulation she screamed at Eva over. Effective date, 3 weeks before the board's last public meeting. One that had only 3 attendees. Not enough for quorum. That was it. That was the crack I needed, and I wasn't the only one. That evening, a man I barely knew knocked on my door. Late 40s, gray around the temples, and eyes that carried years of polite silence. He introduced himself as Marcel Jenks, vice treasurer of the board. Said he didn't agree with what happened, that he'd been trying to raise concerns internally for months. Denise runs the board like it's her private property, he told me. We've lost 3 members in the last year. I stayed because someone had to record what wasn't being said. He didn't stay long, just long enough to tell me I wasn't alone. And just before he left, he said one more thing. Look into the filings with the State Oversight Office. If what I think is true, none of her new rules mean a damn thing. He was gone before I could ask what he meant. But I already knew where to look, and I knew I wasn't just dealing with a power trip. I was dealing with a paper crown and a match. I just needed a strike. I found Marcel again the next morning, quietly tending the rose bushes outside his garage like nothing had changed. He didn't look up when I approached, just clipped a stem, gently set the bloom aside, and said, "They're not even hers. These came from the previous owner. She tried to fine me for their height last year." I waited. I didn't press. Eventually he said, "I saw the footage. I saw everything." There was gravel in his voice. Regret, maybe. Not weakness. He struck me as a man who'd spent too many years being careful, whose caution had calcified into stillness. "You were board treasurer," I said low. "You're still listed on the website." He nodded once, then again, more slowly. "Vice treasurer now. No voting rights." Denise had a bylaw change passed without motion, restructured the board tiers, stripped all non-executives of authority. Which she didn't have quorum to do. Marcel glanced around. His porch light blinked once, a subtle flicker. I realized he'd rerouted the motion sensor, using it to spot visitors from inside. Smart, subtle, controlled. "She told us it was temporary," he said. said it was just a governance efficiency measure, and I let it go. I let too much go. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that people like Denise wrapped their control in small print and smiles, but I didn't. He already knew. Instead, I asked, "Why now?" He paused at that, took his time snipping a second rose, placing it beside the first like a fragile truth. "She could have screamed at your daughter, threatened her, filed a citation, but she didn't." His voice tightened. "She put hands on her. You don't touch someone's child. You don't do that." That was the break in him, I realized. Not policy, not process, contact. "She's been escalating for years," Marcel went on. "Used fear, legal fog, passive threats. But when she grabbed your girl, I saw something I couldn't walk past." He finally looked at me then, eyes steady, not begging, not fragile. "I don't want to be anonymous anymore, not for this." I nodded. "Then let's take it apart." Back home, I told Nate everything Marcel had said. He listened, arms crossed, face unreadable. Then he walked to the home office, typed in a 6-digit passcode I didn't know he'd memorized, and pulled up the HUD Housing Authority complaints portal. "I'm not submitting this as a neighbor," he said. "I'm submitting this as an immediate family member of a vulnerable person affected by mismanagement of housing authority policy. That gives it teeth." I didn't ask how he knew that. I didn't need to. By midday, the first formal complaint had been filed, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. We needed more than a fence. We needed leverage. So I went to the one place Denise hated to be challenged, the community garden. Not the pristine HOA-owned plot behind the clubhouse, but the small fenced lot beside the maintenance shed, where residents had once been allowed to grow vegetables. Denise had tried to shut it down years ago, said it attracted insects and lacked visual cohesion, but the neighbors fought back and the garden stayed, barely. That's where I found Maria Esposito, pulling weeds in a sun hat, her wide-brimmed silence a language of its own. "She pulled your mailbox out," I said simply. "No vote, no warning." Maria didn't look up. "Said it violated code. It was a memorial for your husband." A pause, then a slow nod. "I need your story," I said. "Not for gossip, for grounds. The department won't act on a single incident. But patterns they listen to." She set her trowel down. "You're serious?" "My daughter could have lost her child, Maria." My throat tightened. "Because of a lie printed on fake letterhead." Maria's eyes flared. No drama, just heat. "I'll find the photos," she said. "The ones I took before they hauled it away." I thanked her, but I didn't leave right away. I stayed long enough to help her dig around the base of a stubborn tomato vine. She didn't say much after that. Didn't need to. One by one, the pillars Denise built weren't just cracking. They were remembering what stood before her. The letter came certified. Denise didn't hand-deliver it. That would have taken courage. Instead, she used HOA stationery and an off-site courier service. Neutral, impersonal, like a lawyer trying not to get caught leaving fingerprints on the bat. The envelope was thick, too thick. Inside was a 6-page intent to fine and enforce notice, printed in 12-point Times New Roman, double-spaced for dramatic flair. Violation. 1. Unauthorized vehicle parking violation. 2. Non-compliant medical drop-off violation. 3. Unauthorized security recording violation. 4. Digital threat against board official. And at the bottom, in bold, failure to remit fines and cease future infractions will result in legal action, lien placement, and security level review. Security level review? That wasn't even in the bylaws. It sounded made up because it was. But I knew her tactic: flood the paper, threaten financial ruin, make people too exhausted or afraid to fight. Nate read it twice, then folded it in half. "She's trying to trigger a panic response," he said. "Force us to react emotionally and mess up the legal chain." "She thinks she still controls the timeline," I replied. "She doesn't know what we already filed." I checked the timestamp from HUD. Our federal complaint had been received, routed to regional enforcement, and logged for administrative review. That alone wouldn't bring her down. Not yet. But it meant every piece of communication from Denise forward was now subject to federal scrutiny. So I sent an email. Brief, professional. copied the HOA board, the County Housing Oversight Office, and our assigned HUD investigator. I attached the footage, the citation letter, and the community bulletin flyer, which was now missing from the gate board, ripped down within 24 hours of being posted. I wrote one sentence. This response is on record under federal review case Zinova 4579-Shadva. Then I shut my laptop and went outside. I wasn't going to let this war drag me into a bunker. Denise wanted fear, but fear isn't what moves people. Stories do. And the next one came from an unexpected place. The Mitchells. Their daughter Talia had drawn chalk art again. Sunbursts, planets, a clumsy little cat with 3 legs. This time, it wasn't erased. It was surrounded by orange cones, placed gently around the edges. Beside it sat a folded lawn chair. In it, Mr. Mitchell. Book in hand, not reading, just present. "She's not drawing on the sidewalk," he said to me quietly when I walked by. "She's drawing on community property. That's the board's term, so I'm making sure no board member steps on it." We didn't need to say Denise's name. The cone placement alone said everything. That same afternoon, Eva came downstairs in her robe and looked me in the eye. "I want to file a personal statement," she said. "Not for drama, not to escalate, just to document what happened, on paper, so no one can twist it." She handed me a typed draft. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't angry, it was precise. I parked in my father's driveway. I was not in violation of community law. I was forcibly removed from my vehicle by a non-law enforcement individual who claimed authority under a bylaw that does not exist in current records. I am 7 months pregnant. My OB has issued a letter stating physical trauma could result in preterm complications. I read it 3 times, not as her father, as someone who understood how courts worked, how systems responded. Then I added it to the file. Denise wasn't just escalating. She was trying to reclaim her narrative. She thought a piece of paper could scare us off. But we had paper too. Stronger paper, filed, time-stamped, reviewed by people she couldn't manipulate over coffee in the clubhouse. The community had started to shift, not loud, not yet, but with intent. The garden still bloomed, the chalk still colored, the stories still came. Denise had no idea what was growing beneath her feet. The HOA's next move wasn't loud. It was procedural, calculated. On Friday morning, I opened my mailbox and found a yellow slip tucked inside. Not a fine this time, but a notice of special emergency session scheduled for Monday evening. Location, clubhouse conference room. Purpose, review of non-compliance and threat management measures. No names, no specifics, just vague legal padding and a threat buried under formality. But I knew exactly what it was. Denise was trying to build a paper trail to justify her actions. She wanted to manufacture legitimacy before the federal complaint reached critical mass. This session would be her stage. She'd plant buzzwords, threats, disruption, safety risk. So, when HUD called, she could say she was responding to a pattern of danger. But there was a problem with her plan. HUD had already called me. It happened quietly, on a secure line routed through the nonprofit's legal compliance division. A regional agent named Leanna Burke introduced herself and asked for 3 things: the footage of the incident, the citation letter Denise sent, and the HOA's articles of incorporation on file with the Commonwealth of Virginia. I had 2 of the 3. The third I wasn't sure how to get, until Marcel called, not texted, called. "I have the original incorporation packet," he said, his voice low but controlled. "Filed when the HOA was first established in 1998. I've also got all the subsequent amendments through 2020. "What about the last 3 years?" I asked. "They were never filed," Marcel said. "Denise pushed them through internally, but they're ghosts. No state record, no legal standing." He paused. "And the so-called standing vehicle initiative she cited against your daughter? Drafted in Word, not even notarized." It hit me like a cold wind. Denise's entire framework, the fines, the threats, the session on Monday, was built on invisible law, unfiled, unratified, and now federally relevant. Marcel didn't just have suspicions. He had proof. I met him that evening in the back patio of the Oak and Vine Cafe, 2 blocks from the neighborhood line. Neutral ground, no HOA jurisdiction. He handed me a thumb drive and a printed packet in a sealed folder. Inside were scanned copies of every amendment, highlighted to show what had been legally processed and what hadn't. "This is what you'll need for HUD," he said, "and for the others." "What others?" "The homeowners," Marcel said. "People are scared, but they're watching. If you can show them Denise has no legal foundation for what she's doing, they'll start talking." I opened the folder again and stared at the last page. It was blank. "No records beyond May 2020, Marcel confirmed. "Denise removed the record keeper that summer, said it was a budget decision. It was a cover-up. 3 years of illegal authority, 3 years of citations, harassment, unauthorized private patrols, and no oversight. And now it was ours to expose. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my truck under the dim street lamp in the cafe lot, staring at that folder like it was a key to a door I hadn't realized was locked. Then I picked up the phone and called Leanna Burke back. "I have the articles of incorporation," I told her, "and proof that everything used against my daughter was fabricated under unfiled amendments." She didn't ask how I got it, just said, "Send it securely. I'll escalate this for active review." I hung up. In that moment, something in me shifted, not just as a father, or a husband, or a nonprofit director, but as a man who'd spent his life saving lives by understanding pressure, where to apply it, how long to hold, and when to release. And Denise Howcroft had no idea she was standing in the middle of a pressure zone. She thought this emergency session would corner us, but now we weren't walking in to defend ourselves. We were walking in to bury the illusion she had spent 3 years crafting. Monday came with a heat wave, 92 degrees by 3 p.m., humidity high enough to make the air feel like gauze. The kind of day where nothing should happen, where people cancel plans, retreat indoors, wait it out. But by 6:30, the clubhouse parking lot was nearly full, not for the pool, not for the pickleball league, for the emergency session. Merriwood Preserve hadn't seen this much turnout in years. Folding chairs were lined up in haphazard rows. Fans wheeled in from the rec center and aimed at the walls like they could cool a room soaked in tension. Denise stood at the front of the conference room in a lemon-yellow blouse, clipboard in hand, trying to look unbothered. But the sweat creeping down her temple betrayed her. She didn't look at me when I walked in with Nate and Eva. Didn't glance at Marcel, who took a chair by the coffee urn like he had every right to be there. She just raised the clipboard and said, "Let's begin." Her voice was too calm, practiced. She launched into a scripted preamble, words like disruption, safety protocols, community cohesion. She called Eva's incident a regrettable misunderstanding triggered by inconsistent vehicle data, and cited Board Authority under 2023 Amendment 4A. The moment she said it, I stood up. "Can you clarify when Amendment 4A was filed with the Commonwealth Housing Authority?" The room stilled. Denise blinked like a faulty sensor. "It was passed by board vote," she said carefully, "in accordance with procedural override due to emergency circumstance." "Which emergency?" I asked. Another pause. Then she fumbled. "Well, there was the neighborhood vandalism trend in spring of 2022, which wasn't cited in any board minutes," Marcel added from his seat without looking up. "And the amendment wasn't notarized, or filed, or legally binding." That did it. A murmur rippled through the room. I saw Mrs. Bennett, the widow from Windmere Lane, lean forward in her chair. I saw 2 younger residents, engineers I think, start pulling out their phones. Denise opened her mouth to respond, but Nate stepped forward, slow and controlled. "My name is Nathaniel Lantham. I'm a federal agent, and I can confirm that this matter is currently under administrative review by the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Homeland Security." "You could have heard a pin drop," Denise tried to wave it off. "That's not relevant to this meeting." "It is," I said, holding up the thumb drive. "This contains every legal amendment filed with the state since Merriwood's incorporation. Yours stop in 2020. Everything after that, including the rule you cited to physically remove my daughter from her car, it has no legal standing." Someone in the back gasped. Someone else stood. Then Maria Esposito raised her voice. "She ripped out my husband's memorial mailbox under one of those fake rules." More voices joined. Mr. Mitchell, a woman from the West End with 2 toddlers. Even a board member I didn't recognize spoke up. Quiet, firm. "I never voted on 4A or 4B. I was told they were already approved." Denise's mask cracked then. Just a flicker. the tightness in her jaw, the whiteness of her knuckles. She looked for backup, but the people she once ruled through whispers and warnings were no longer nodding. I stepped closer to the table. This session wasn't called to protect anyone. It was damage control, and now the damage is evidence. Denise opened her mouth, but then Marcel stood and slid a sealed envelope across the table toward the board's legal representative. The Articles of Incorporation, the last valid bylaws, and my resignation letter as vice treasurer. I won't be complicit in another minute of this. He looked at me, then nodded once before leaving the room. And just like that, the meeting turned. Denise didn't gavel it to a close. She didn't adjourn. She just stood there, paralyzed, as neighbor after neighbor stepped forward with story after story. No one shouted. No one argued. They simply laid her reign bare. I watched it happen with Eva beside me, her hand resting gently on her belly. This wasn't justice yet, but it was the crack before the fall. The fallout didn't come in a roar. It came in silence. Emails unreturned, HOA channels suddenly under scheduled review, and Denise nowhere to be seen for 3 straight days. Her car stayed parked under the oak by the clubhouse, but no one caught her entering or leaving, like she was hiding behind the very rules she'd weaponized. The notice came on Thursday, not from the board, from the County Office of Housing Administration. A sealed envelope delivered by certified courier, addressed to both me and Eva. It confirmed that a joint inquiry between AUD and DHS had begun under preliminary authority. The letter referenced multiple citations from the footage, verbal testimony, and recent corroborated disclosures from a named internal board officer. They meant Marcel. I called him that evening. He answered on the second ring. "You did it," I said. He didn't respond right away, just a tired breath on the other end. Then, "They came to my door, 2 weeks before your daughter arrived. Denise and Carla from the board said I needed to stop pushing for reviews, said they'd put me on the non-compliance radar. And now, I sent everything," he said, "not just to HUD, to every homeowner, unredacted scans, meeting minutes, budget discrepancies, the security contract she tried to hide in the garden committee ledger." "Good," I said. "Let them see what they were paying for." "They already are," he replied. Group chats lit up. People are furious, not just at her, at themselves, for waiting this long. I looked out the window. Across the street, the Mitchells were stringing soft lights around their porch again, the ones Denise made them take down in April for seasonal incongruity. "She's going to retaliate," Marcel said. "She'll frame it as harassment, misconduct, whatever sticks. You should be ready." I am, and I was. I'd spent the last 2 days compiling everything: my initial complaint, Eva's medical summary, the full HOA packet Marcel had delivered, and 3 new testimonies emailed to me anonymously from residents with near-identical stories. Fines without hearings, threats without process, and quotes from non-existent bylaws. But it was Nate who put the final piece into place. He came into the kitchen holding a manila folder labeled FRA Pray, Advisory 1179. "What's that?" I asked. "Federal Residential Authority, Pattern Review Advisory," he said, "used for identifying clusters of housing code violations when reported in volume from similar demographics or geographic regions." He flipped the folder open and pointed to the clause. "If 3 or more complaints are filed within a 90-day window under identical procedural grievances involving housing administration or community governance, the region becomes eligible for independent audit without board approval." I stared at the paragraph. 3 or more complaints. We had 5. "They'll trigger it next week," Nate said. "Audit team will come in quiet. No press, no forewarning, just clipboards and questions. They won't even knock on her door first." He slid the folder to me and tapped the corner. "She used government language to justify her behavior. Now the government gets to speak." I sat back in my chair and let the words settle, not out of shock, out of confirmation. We weren't building a case anymore. We were pulling down a regime. That weekend, Maria Esposito hosted a front yard coffee table meetup. No HOA banner, no agenda, just folding chairs, muffins, and a plastic bin of Xeroxed HOA notices from the past 3 years. People came with their own copies, highlighted, annotated, dated. They passed around a clipboard, not to complain, but to sign a demand for emergency recall. And in the middle of it all, Marcel stood with his back to the sundial, He held his hands behind him like a teacher, spoke plainly, said nothing dramatic, just facts. He said, "Every system needs a correction eventually. Ours is overdue." No one cheered, no one clapped, but no one left either. They stayed, listened, prepared. The sundial caught the last light of the evening, casting a long shadow across the garden path. The same one Denise once tried to fine me over for non-standard placement. Now it pointed straight toward her front steps. The first thing I did Monday morning was update the submission package. I added the new signatures from the petition, printed copies of the statements Maria had gathered, and included a screenshot from the neighborhood group chat Marcel forwarded to me. A scroll of messages, time-stamped and unedited, all sharing stories of intimidation, fines, unapproved surveillance. Then I printed one last page, just one sentence centered. We no longer consent to being governed by fear. It wasn't for the agencies, it was for the people. The folder went into a sealed envelope addressed to the HUD regional office in Arlington. Nate handled the rest. He didn't wear a uniform. He didn't need to. He walked into the government building like he belonged there, because he did, and had it logged, time-stamped, and entered into the active complaint file by noon. By 3:15, the audit trigger activated. Not a word from Denise, but the silence was louder than a siren. Tuesday morning, a white government SUV pulled into the Merriwood Preserve parking lot. No logos, no drama. 2 men in button-downs, 1 woman in a slate gray pantsuit. They entered the clubhouse, met with the acting board counsel, and asked for the HOA's records of the past 5 years. And that's where things started to crack open. The records weren't there. Denise hadn't stored them in the HOA filing cabinet. She'd moved them, digitally, off-site, onto a personal drive under the justification of cybersecurity concerns. But the password she gave the auditor didn't work. And the backup files? Destroyed due to ransomware exposure, according to a board memo that no one else had ever seen. That afternoon, I received a formal request for testimony, not from HUD, from the Virginia Civil Governance Oversight Committee. Apparently, one of the board's insurance policies had lapsed during the period Denise made unilateral rule changes. That opened the door to a state-level review on top of the federal one. Liability, governance, malfeasance. I agreed to testify. So did Ava. And so did Marcel. Preparation began that night. We met at my dining room table, the sundial just visible through the window, casting its evening shadow across the porch. Marcel laid out the sequence of events like a prosecutor, dates, motions, withdrawn meeting minutes, audio recordings of private votes. He brought a copy of the original HOA code, annotated with notes in red pen, where Denise had manipulated wording and misapplied legal clauses. Nate added what we needed from the security side: language, timelines, enforcement errors. He pulled from advisory manuals, cited precedent from other cases where board overreach had triggered housing violations under state law. I contributed the personal impact, the physical threat to Eva, the falsified fine notices, the reputational risk to our nonprofit due to HOA mischaracterizations of our mail activity. It wasn't a rebellion, it was a blueprint. We weren't burning the system down. We were proving it had already rotted, and now someone had to clean up what was left behind. Eva didn't say much that night. She just sat across from me with her hands on her belly, listening. When we paused, she cleared her throat and said, "Do you think she knew what she was doing? Or did she just think no one would fight back?" No one answered, because the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. Denise had believed her title made her untouchable. Now the state would decide if she was even legitimate. The audit was scheduled to continue through the week. The board was ordered to cease all enforcement actions until the inquiry concluded. Several members resigned. Others, we heard, had already consulted attorneys. The community? It got quieter, but not in fear, in calculation. You could feel it in the way people walked their dogs past the clubhouse without averting their eyes. The way lawn chairs appeared again on porches, wind chimes tinkled against the breeze, and neighborhood kids started drawing chalk lines across the sidewalks without cones or bodyguards. There was no revolution, but something had changed. Denise was still in her house, but the authority she once wore like armor, it no longer fit, and it was beginning to show in every thread. Wednesday morning, I trimmed the hedges, not because they needed it, because I knew she was watching. Her blinds twitched around 8:10 a.m. That was her routine. A sliver of light cracked through the side window above her walkway, always for less than a minute, just long enough to assess who was out, who was stepping out of line. I stayed in full view, clippers in hand, no hat, no sunglasses, just a man with nothing to hide and no reason to flinch. By now, the audit team had met with 4 residents. I knew because 2 of them came by afterward, quietly, respectfully, asking for copies of the documents Marcel had provided. I gave them printouts, already collated and sealed. I'd made a dozen sets the night before. Nate was working from home that day, but not as my husband. He was now our field liaison to the Joint Review Committee. Not officially, just in practice. He understood what they needed. Timeline chains, source validation, witness statements. Everything presented in clean legal order, no emotion, no dramatics. What we were building wasn't a case. It was a wall, tight seams, no cracks. And behind it, we had truth. That afternoon, I set up 3 appointments, one with Maria, one with a former board member who'd quietly left the neighborhood last year, and one with a neighbor I barely knew, Frank Allerton, a structural engineer who had once dared to paint his shutters a shade off regulation and paid $6,400 in accumulated fines over 18 months. He had receipts. "Why now?" I asked when he slid them across the cafe table. "I watched what happened to your daughter," he said without blinking, "and I figured if I was ever going to speak, it had to be when it mattered." I included his evidence in the primary binder, labeled it under financial impact of non-ratified enforcement. Nate double-checked the filing codes. By the evening, we had everything arranged for pre-hearing submission, except one thing: Denise's financial trail. Marcel said she'd been funneling discretionary board funds into third-party safety assessments. Contracts never voted on, payments never disclosed publicly. They were buried in expense lines labeled infrastructure contingency and non-predictive risk evaluation, fancy words for invisible services. But where were the invoices? Where was the money really going? That's when Eva spoke up. We were sitting on the porch. The sundial shadow stretched long and low, touching the top stair where her feet rested. She asked me once if Nate had any friends in local security firms, she said suddenly. I turned. "What?" "Months ago, we ran into her at the mailbox. I was picking up some grant letters. She said she was looking for reliable contractors to help secure the community against trend threats. Asked if Nate ever talked about vendors." "And you told her?" "Nothing," Eva said. "I thought it was just more HOA paranoia. But now I think she was testing, figuring out who might question the line items. It was enough." I went back through the scanned financials, cross-checked the security firm listed on the newsletter photo with the actual budget report from the same quarter. The names didn't match. On paper, the firm was Trinity Safecore Logistics. But the truck in the photo? It bore the name Sentry Vantage Response, a company with no listing in the state contractor registry. We had her. Denise wasn't just enforcing fake rules. She was laundering her authority through phantom vendors. I compiled the discrepancy. Nate verified it against federal business databases. Marcel flagged the last known payment line and added a footnote confirming there had never been a board vote. It became Exhibit 22 in our submission packet. By nightfall, we had the complete foundation for the public exposure phase. 12 testimonies, 5 cases of illegal enforcement, 1 security contract that didn't exist, and 1 woman standing alone in a house full of windows that no longer shielded her from the truth. The board was fractured, the neighborhood was prepared, and the truth, it had been sharpened down to a point. The night before the board meeting, I didn't sleep. Not from anxiety, there was nothing left to fear, but from clarity. My mind wouldn't stop arranging the order of facts. The story had to land, not with fire, with precision. By morning, the neighborhood looked like it had finally exhaled. Lawns trimmed, porches swept, cars parked without fear of fines. Even the air felt different, still humid, but lighter. Denise must have sensed it too. At 4:22 p.m., a new flyer appeared on the community bulletin board, stamped with the HOA seal and written in her usual serif font, "Official board, business only. All non-resident materials will be removed immediately. Unauthorized posting, subject to fine." But no one tore down the audit notice. No one touched the recall petition taped beside it. They fluttered side by side in the late-day breeze like twin verdicts waiting to be read. At 6 sharp, the doors to the clubhouse opened. By 6:05, it was standing room only. Ava sat with Nate near the back, a cushion behind her, and a water bottle clutched in both hands. Maria Esposito was to her left, petition folder in her lap, eyes sharp beneath a floral scarf. Marcel stood beside me near the front, calm, steady, unblinking. Denise walked in at 6:11. She didn't apologize, didn't smile. She took her seat at the center of the board table, adjusted the microphone that wasn't connected to anything, and began reading from a sheet of paper. Good evening. This session of the Marrowood Preserve HOA is convened to address recent disruption and misinformation concerning board protocol. I move for a full reading of state-certified articles of incorporation, Marcel interrupted, voice flat. Denise froze. Someone in the back coughed. Another person said, seconded. She tried to continue, but the room had shifted again, like tectonic plates under pressure. She was sitting in her usual chair, but no one was sitting under her rules, so I stepped forward. I'm Dr. Rostin Lantham, resident of Marrowood. I'd like to enter into public record a compiled audit report of the board's actions over the past 3 years, including evidence of fabricated enforcement, unfiled amendments, and unauthorized use of HOA funds. I handed the folder to the board secretary, a woman who'd said nothing for weeks, but now looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. This report includes financial discrepancies, a non-existent security contract, and testimonies from residents who were fined, harassed, or silenced under non-binding bylaws. Denise tried to speak, but Marcel stood again. Mrs. Howcroft, he said, can you confirm the legal registration number for Amendment 4A, which you cited during the removal of Mrs. Eva Lantham from her vehicle? Silence. Can you provide the state filing confirmation for any amendment post-May 2020? Still nothing. Someone in the audience whispered, she can't. Another followed, louder, because they don't exist. Nate rose next. He didn't need a podium. My name is Nathaniel Lantham. I'm a federal agent. I have filed through proper channels complaints currently under review with HUD and DHS. At this time, I can confirm that Marrowood Preserve is under active federal audit for suspected violations of housing governance laws. Gasps, murmurs, phones lifted. Not for drama, but for evidence, to document history. Eva stood too, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the edge of her chair. When you pulled me from that car, you weren't protecting this neighborhood. You were pretending to be the law, and now you're going to find out what real law feels like. Her voice didn't waver. Denise pushed back from her seat, eyes darting, but the room wasn't hers anymore. Not the floor, not the board, not even the microphone. Maria stood. Mr. Mitchell did too. Then Frank. Then the former board member who had returned just to speak. And they did. One by one. No shouting, no vengeance, just truth. And Denise? She remained silent. By 7:03, the vote to suspend her powers had passed by a margin of 28-2. She didn't stay to watch the rest. She walked out the side door without a word. And this time, no one looked away. The following morning, the lock on the HOA office door was changed. No announcement, no warning, just a silent swap. A locksmith van rolled up at 8:01 a.m., stayed for 20 minutes, and left without a word. The board secretary, now acting chair, stood outside with a folded binder under one arm, watching him work. No one tried to stop her. No one had to. Denise hadn't been seen since the vote, not at the clubhouse, not near the walking trail, not behind her curtain. The silence she used to enforce was now pressing in on her from all sides. At 10:15, a plain white sedan with state plates pulled into her driveway. A man and woman in collared shirts stepped out, each carrying an unmarked file case. They didn't knock. They stood at the door, rang once, and waited. She opened it after a full minute. I watched from across the street, pruning the low bushes near our sundial, not hiding, never again. They showed her papers, not handcuffs, not orders. Just paperwork, legal and quiet. Denise said something I couldn't hear. Her hands moved fast, talking too much, too late. The man pointed at one of the documents. She stopped moving. The woman gestured toward the inside of the house. Denise hesitated, then opened the door wider and let them in. Nate joined me on the porch a few minutes later. "They're from the state's audit team," he said. "Final review phase. They're collecting testimony and financial confirmations, likely prepping for civil enforcement, maybe more." "Do we get called in?" "We already have, Friday morning, all three of us." He nodded toward Eva's car, parked under the shade, her silhouette just visible through the window. "We go together." By noon, an official email was sent to every resident from the interim board. Effective immediately, all HOA enforcement actions are suspended. All prior fines and citations issued under non-ratified amendments are subject to full review. Community members are encouraged to attend Saturday's open forum to participate in new bylaw restructuring. A single paragraph. But to us, it felt like a war ending. Ava stepped outside just before sunset. She hadn't said much since the meeting, not because she was afraid, because she was waiting. She stood beside the sundial now, one hand on the curved edge of the bronze rim, the other resting under her ribs. "She's due in 3 weeks, she said softly. "Feels like a lifetime's passed since last Monday." "It has," I told her. She looked across the street at Denise's house, lights off, curtains drawn, the white sedan gone. "Do you think she thought she was protecting something?" Eva asked. "Or do people like that just want to win, no matter what it costs?" I didn't have a clean answer. Maybe Denise started with structure in mind, control disguised as order. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the community and started being about her reflection in the glass. The rules weren't rules anymore, they were armor, and when we stripped them back, she had nothing underneath. That night, the forum filled every seat in the community center. No Denise, no old guard, just residents, people who hadn't spoken to each other in months, people who had been fined, warned, reprimanded, ignored. And now they were laughing again, not loud, not careless, just open. Marcel stood near the whiteboard at the front. He looked like a man who'd finally stepped out of the long hallway he'd been trapped in for years. "We're going to build new bylaws," he said. "Together, transparent, simple, enforceable only with majority vote and recorded input. This community doesn't belong to any one person. It belongs to all of us." And no one clapped. They didn't need to. They just nodded. A shared agreement sealed not with signatures, but with memory. I stayed until the last folding chair was stacked. And when I walked home, the porch lights blinked on in houses that had stayed dark for too long. Change had arrived quietly. But it had arrived. Friday morning, we sat in a state office under soft white lights, surrounded by quiet. Not courtroom silence, administrative silence. Neutral walls, short carpet, clipboards on every desk. It wasn't intimidating, it was clinical. But we knew what this moment was. Eva went first. She didn't read from a script, she didn't cry, she just told the truth. What it felt like to have her door yanked open. What it meant to be dragged out while carrying a child who wasn't ready to come into the world yet. What it meant to live in a neighborhood where people measured you against codes instead of decency. She ended with one line. "My daughter didn't kick the first time until the ambulance pulled away." After that, the room didn't speak for 10 seconds. Nate followed. He submitted the compiled incident timeline, the digital complaint threads, the flagged vendor discrepancies. He didn't mention his title. He didn't need to. The authority in his voice came from something deeper. Conviction, not badge. Then it was my turn. I didn't talk about Denise. I talked about my mother, the woman who died helping someone give life. I talked about the sundial, how it wasn't a decoration, but a promise. A promise that no matter how far we moved from our roots, we would never stop protecting the vulnerable. I said, "You don't need to punish her. To fix this, you need to show everyone else what happens when silence becomes structure." When we left the building, Eva slid her hand into mine. "She kicked again," she whispered, "twice." That afternoon, Denise's resignation was made official. A short statement, posted on the HOA website. "Due to ongoing legal matters and personal considerations, I, Denise Howcroft, resign from the position of president effective immediately." No apology, no explanation, just an exit. But it wasn't the end. The state released its preliminary audit summary the following week. Denise had violated multiple procedural mandates. She had signed off on more than $30,000 in unauthorized security expenditures. She had enforced 7 amendments with no legal standing, and worst of all, she had failed to disclose 3 formal complaints filed by residents, burying them before they reached review. The board was ordered to undergo mandatory reformation. Marcel was appointed interim chair by unanimous community vote. The sundial was added to the new bylaws as a designated historic object, permanent, protected, and never subject to future citation. Ava gave birth the following month. Healthy, strong. Her name was Lena. She came into a world where rules no longer outweighed responsibility. And on the morning of her naming ceremony, we sat beside the sundial, the whole neighborhood watching, as Ava handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a poem my mother once wrote, one I hadn't seen in years. Marcel had found it tucked into the original HOA records. It read, "Build gates if you must, but never forget. A gate means nothing without hands that open it." We read it together, and for the first time since moving into Merrillwood Preserve, it felt like home. If you've ever lived under the grip of someone who hides behind power, if you've ever felt like the rules were only made for you, never for them, then this story was for you. Subscribe now for more real, grounded stories where people fight back against control, silence, and fear. These are the battles worth sharing, and the victories that remind us who we are when no one is watching. Because no HOA, no title, and no rulebook should ever have the power to decide who matters.